700 years after it sank, the wreckage of a massive empire remains scattered across the floor of Imari Bay like a modern crime scene. This is the graveyard of Kublai Khan's armada. In the late 13th century, the Mongol Empire launched a force that wouldn't be eclipsed in scale until D-Day. They sent thousands of ships to conquer Japan, only to see the entire expedition vanish. For centuries, the details of this defeat were shrouded in myth, but archaeologists are now extracting tangible evidence from the seabed, like this ceramic jar, resting exactly where it was lost 7 centuries ago. This physical debris challenges the traditional legend of the kamikaze. For generations, the Japanese believed the gods summoned a divine wind to save the nation. Modern archaeology and climate science are now uncovering a different story. By analyzing the forensics buried in the mud of Imari Bay, researchers are finally identifying why this unstoppable force actually failed. The first signs of the disaster involve the overwhelming technological threat the Mongols brought to the coast. Divers have recovered hollow ceramic shells, early grenades called tetsuhao, which the Mongols used alongside tens of thousands of seasoned troops. But historical records describe a Japanese resistance that was far more tenacious than the Mongols anticipated. During the 1274 invasion, samurai used small, fast boats to swarm and board the massive Mongol vessels in relentless close-quarters combat. These constant night ambushes forced a critical strategic error. Fearing a total massacre at anchor, Mongol commanders retreated their fleet into open water at night for safety, positioning their ships directly in the path of a developing storm. By the time the second invasion arrived in 1281, the Japanese had evolved. They constructed massive stone walls along the coastline that completely blocked the Mongol armada from landing, leaving the invaders trapped afloat for months. The hardened coastal defenses functioned as an anvil. They pinned the Mongol fleet in exposed, hostile waters, holding them in place until nature delivered the final blow. Other artifacts found on the bay floor revealed the fleet's desperate final moments. Archaeologists discovered several large wooden anchors, all buried deep in the mud and pointing uniformly south. This southern alignment shows the fleet was bracing against the full force of a massive typhoon. To see why the ships couldn't withstand the pressure, investigators turned to the structural forensics of the shattered hull timbers. Rushing their navy, the Mongols built thousands of flat-bottomed riverboats instead of deep V-shaped oceanic holes. In the Tsushima Strait's heavy swells, flat holes violently tip and capsize, whereas V-shaped holes cleanly cut through the turbulence. Imperial logistics and rushed engineering doomed the expedition. The Mongols reached the battlefield in ships that were physically incapable of surviving the environment they were forced to occupy. Understanding the frequency of these storms required looking beyond the shoreline. At nearby Lake Daija, geologists are drilling deep into the earth to extract sediment cores that record ancient weather patterns. This graph tracks typhoon frequency over a 2,000-year period. The sediment data shows that the 13th century experienced a significant spike in extreme storm activity, a shift linked to a powerful El Niño cycle that made intense typhoons much more common. The Mongol armada was anchored in a dangerous geographic location during the most volatile decade for extreme weather in the region's history. There was no supernatural intervention. The destruction of the fleet was a statistical certainty, caused by the intersection of extreme climate cycles and a trapped, ill-equipped fleet. The 1281 storm drowned tens of thousands of Mongol soldiers and effectively ended Kublai Khan's expansion into the Pacific. This survival reshaped the Japanese national character. It embedded a belief that the islands were sacred and untouchable, protected by a spiritual safeguard that would always appear in times of crisis. This myth of the kamikaze remained a part of the national identity for centuries, eventually being resurrected as propaganda during the final years of the Second World War. 20th century suicide pilots were explicitly named after this 13th century storm. They were tasked with becoming a new divine wind that would sweep their enemies from the sea, just as the legends claimed the gods had done before. Returning to the wreckage in the bay, the true story is one of alignment, not magic. The storm that saved Japan was a brutal convergence of human tenacity, of flawed engineering, and of violent climate, a reality that ultimately birthed one of history's most powerful myths.